Understanding the impact of nectar. The Wingspan Oceania Expansion introduces a wild food type called nectar. It can be used to score extra points in a special area of each habitat on the new boards. This scoring is handled just like round bonuses, but will only result in 5 points for first place and 2 points for second place. Everyone else gets 0 points. The most any person can score in a game is 15 points. Most of the time it'll be less than that. It's an interesting new game element to pursue for extra points. Whenever you spend nectar by playing a bird, discarding it for a bonus conversion, upgrading an action, or discarding it as an appropriate cost of a power, you place that nectar on the spent nectar space of the appropriate habitat that it was spent in. Unspent nectar in your personal supply is discarded to the general supply at the end of each round, so make sure you find a way to use it. Nectar has an interesting effect on the game. It gives further advantage to the forest habitat that was already buffed on the new mat. This makes it easier to play bird cards in a game while playing bird cards, and it seems to address some complaints people had regarding the issues of egg spam in the core set. The game feels a bit more accelerated from the beginning thanks to your one starting nectar, and average scores are generally inflated by 10 to 20 points when nectar is used. Scores breaking 100 points are going to be much more common. Nectar will also reduce some of the decision-making elements of manipulating the bird feeder. One important thing to remember is that gaining nectar is not always the best choice. It's important to be able to make this distinction. The closer you get to the end of the round, the more important spending nectar becomes because you must discard it to the general supply if you don't use it. Nectar has a time limit each round, and gaining it for the sake of gaining it is a fruitless effort. You can't stockpile it for point bombing in the closing turns of the game. This nectar clock will influence your decisions each round if you choose to hoard it. You must capitalize on it in some fashion, otherwise your actions to acquire it will have been pointless. Don't forget about the bonus conversions on the player mats, that is, discarding a less useful resource for a more useful one. Know how and when to use them to maximum effect. Spending nectar on these options is optimal, as you can place it on the spent nectar spaces of the appropriate habitat. This is also a good way to spend nectar that would otherwise have been discarded at the end of the round. Increasing the player count will make it harder for any one person to run away with nectar points, as there is more competition to gather and use it. Additionally, this increases the tension surrounding this scoring option, and I think it's why some people feel that the game becomes all about the acquisition of this food when you play with the Oceania rules. It can be easy to see your opponents pulling ahead in an obvious way in this category, and it can motivate you to chase after them. But just like with round bonuses or bonus cards, sometimes it's better to ignore these paths for actions that are more profitable for you in the long run. I think this nectar chase can be a trap for people who are not looking at the big picture of their personal game state, especially if they're trying to fight over second place in a habitat for a measly 2 points. Understanding the Oceania metagame. The Oceania metagame favors the acquisition of food, specifically nectar, and playing more birds worth more points. The redesigned forest produces more food, the redesigned wetlands produces more cards, and the redesigned grasslands produces fewer eggs. The 95 cards introduced in the Oceania expansion represents a 53% increase to the core set card pool. 70% of those cards cost 2 to 3 food, but unlike the European meta, the Oceania meta does not slow down since food is so much easier to get. Playing more birds on average increases the usefulness of bonus cards and the birds that draw them. There tends to be less emphasis on engine building, and egg spam is generally less effective. There's a decrease in the total percentage of bonus cards and round bonuses that check eggs and nests, so larger nests and star nests tend to be less valuable, especially if you're also playing with the European expansion. As a general rule, playing with nectar and using the Oceania expansion mat will reduce the effectiveness of cheap food-producing birds. This is due to 3 major factors. 1. Food is easier to generate from the redesigned forest. 2. Nectar lessens the impact of a stubborn bird feeder. And 3. A general increase in the number of birds that gives resources to all players. Due to generally increased food availability, higher point value birds that have higher food costs are easier to get onto the board. This results in a devaluation of cheap birds, which are generally worth fewer points and are often the anchor point of many kinds of engines. Due to less focus on engine building, low point value tuck draw birds tend to have less of an impact. Conversely, egg-laying effects have more of an impact when using the Oceania expansion mat, especially when these powers are played in the forest. Egg-laying forest birds are super premium plays and should almost always be drawn and played if they are available. Grassland egg-laying birds also experience a surge in usefulness. since they work to overcome the weaker Oceania grasslands habitat. These birds are usually overkill and less useful in the core set boards since it can be difficult to find nest space for all those extra eggs.